Welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today I'm Ashley here with Willow and Mr. Cooper, who is the father of who we know of as Cole Summers on Twitter. I will let Willow take it away. We're going to be chatting a little bit about Cole's life and work and his legacy. So go ahead, Willow.
Thanks, Ashley. I think most people listening will be familiar with Cole Summers and the story surrounding his life and death. And I think that we're extraordinarily lucky today to get to have his father here to just talk more about what Kevin was working on, what his plans and dreams were, and how some of us might be able to take that into our lives and try to carry on the work that he was planning to do and that he was doing and made an incredible start on. I guess before we get started with going sort of into a deep dive into those plans, I'll just give a very brief overview for anyone who's listening who's not familiar with his story, which is so Cole Summers was a 14-year-old boy on Twitter who had created an account, and Cole Summers was his pseudonym. His name was Kevin Cooper. But he was just this incredible kid. He had been homeschooled, so sort of unschooled his whole life, and was just like one of these people who was like ambitious and driven, like more than one in a million. He was just incredible. He was working on a host of projects. The latest of which had to do with water conservation and regenerative agriculture. But he was passionate about a whole host of things like business education and homeschooling and unschooling for kids. He started learning about Warren Buffett's sort of thinking processes when he was like 6 years old and started his first business at 7. He was just doing so much, and he just tragically died in June in a kayaking accident, and the whole sphere of Twitter and the internet and people even farther have been just really blown away by his work and really shooken by his loss. And I think his story has really touched a chord with people, and I think it is there's something just so uniquely inspiring about his life. And I know I've read his book like twice all the way through in one sitting at this point. And it's just every time it leaves me like inspired and like completely uplifted. And he had just so many things that he was going to do and so many things he had done in such a short time. So we're going to get into the meat of those things today and talk a bit about all of this stuff with the person who knew him the best. We are so lucky to have his dad here. So welcome, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to think of where to start. I mean, I know it's so hard to know where to kick off, but I guess you had posted a couple videos about sort of just what it was like to work with Kevin. You had a video of him like dancing, shoveling dirt off the back of his truck, which was, I think, very charming and was very captivating. But it seems like he just had this incredible incredible energy and zest for life. I mean, I don't know. It's like, well, I guess, like he saw the world like I think like nobody I've ever met. Do you want to talk a bit about his sort of outlook and maybe where you think some of that came from?
I'm going to be straight out honest. Yeah, I have no idea really where it came from because nobody else I've ever known had the kind of drive and positive outlook in the face of anything that he did. He just, you almost couldn't make him think negatively. And I mean, that video you're talking about, yeah, he's trying to tend to some road repair on his ranch, and I was driving the truck because I can't do much else. I'm disabled, but I can drive, and that was that. And helping him research was really my main role. And so there it was. It was a hot July summer, and in the southern part of the Great Basin Desert down here. It was afternoon time, and he would get a song, whatever. We have no idea what song, but he would get a song in his head and just dance while working. I mean, and so there he was, shoveling gravel on a hot July afternoon, dancing as he worked. And that was how he was with everything. He just, everything had a positive outlook somehow. He found a way. And it kept him going. I mean, and the Energizer Bunny couldn't keep up with him. He would start out at 6 in the morning, and wasn't uncommon that he would keep going until sometimes 2 and 3 in the morning.
Wow.
We actually started making him take melatonin because we were worried you're not sleeping enough. We'd taken him to the doctor, and that was our family practitioner. She's like, yeah, you really should sleep more. But she also turned and explained to us, she's like, not everybody has the same requirements, and no, 4 hours doesn't seem like enough, but for some people, they really can thrive on very little sleep. And
yeah.
And that was kind of him. I mean, he would be up working on a book or something like that, or reading a book or studying, late into the night, and then be out, working his ranch or working with his animals all day long.
It's remarkable, but part of me looks at him and I'm like, if you had so much like momentum and success at such a young age, like if you think about the energy like young kids have, and then you started like actually projecting some power and influence with that energy, like I can imagine that it would be sort of infectious and like feed on itself a little bit.
Yeah, it did. I mean, we would try our best to keep up with him. Just you don't want to. You get to where it's like, I don't want to feel like an underperformer here. And but when you're next to him,
yeah,
it was really easy to feel like an underachiever and an underperformer.
Yeah.
But he would never make anybody feel that way at all. But yeah, I mean, he just a relentless energy to get things done.
And
if
so
it wasn't here, he would be asking neighbors, "What can I help you with? What can I come do?" And especially older neighbors who, there's a lot of retirees who do little small, homestead farms out here, and so he would go over and do stuff for them, and they would just be sitting there like, mm-mm. Even when I was his age, I couldn't keep up with him.
One thing I would add is something about the homeschooling and unschooling philosophy that he talked a lot about. I do think it's worth noting that kids in their young teen age, sort of adolescent age, are just full of so much energy. And a lot of times it's either zapped from school or it's put into something like video games where like they just get obsessive about, something like play. it was just so cool to see in Kevin's case, this kind of like endless, boundless energy directed towards something, like business, like agriculture, like, the things he's passionate about. So that was really an inspirational part of his message.
I will say though, Ashley, I've been around a lot of the like unschooling kind of types, and uh a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of sort of different ideas packed into that general philosophy, but yeah, I still think, like oftentimes like kids are, interested in their little niche projects, and they sort of like, work along at little things or do volunteer stuff in their communities. But yeah, I think the energy is one thing, but like, yeah, I think his ambition was just like, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that they feed into each other, I'm sure. Um,
Oh, they did definitely feed into each other. And yeah, he would joke and look, and he'd hold his fingers up, real close together. He's like, I'm just a little bit ambitious. He, you know, he knew, of course, that his ambition was um, excessive,
well,
way above average.
he seemed to because he was like, it's funny because he like, and you had talked about this about him being worried that his book would come off as like him seeming like he was bragging or or something, and I know that
Yeah,
he was.
he's very concerned that it wouldn't. Like he's like, I don't care how many hours I put into this. He's like, I'm never gonna do it if anybody says they feel like I'm trying to brag here about what I've done. And he's like, I'm just not publishing it, or I'll unpublish it, whatever. He was very, very determined and spent a lot of extra hours working with his writing ghostwriter mentor he was working with. Um,
Yeah.
very determined that the book, he wanted it to inspire other people to see that there was more that they could do. And
Yeah, well, sorry.
that was his goal. And, and I was surprised at how well it seemed like he hit it. Um,
Yeah.
because it's how you talk about starting your first business when you're 7, or buying your first house for your 10th birthday.
Yeah.
Things like
Well,
that.
I think he was really well able to strike this balance of like a like he had a kind of playfulness which made like he didn't shy away from talking about things, and he had like a little bit of kind of like, you know like it wasn't bragging at all, but it was this sort of like, isn't it kind of ridiculous how much like, I don't know, he had a way of talking about it that like acknowledged that he knew it was very unusual, without seeming like he thought he was better than anybody.
He never thought he was better than anybody, and it was a genuine belief.
Yeah.
Uh, that was just, it was there, and he felt like he was more fortunate than a lot of people, even though, I mean, we're far from a well-off family, and we've definitely had some rough times.
Mhm.
He felt fortunate in that he got the opportunity, instead of us going taking. We never took the approach of, well, you're just a kid, go play and leave adult
Mhm.
stuff to adults. It was like, oh, you want to try, building an engine when you're, I think he was 5 the first time he did the majority of an engine build on his own.
Well,
Uh, I was there guiding him, but doing, and I had to lift some of the heavy parts, like the cylinder heads and stuff. But he really did do the vast majority of that on his own, and he loved it. Somewhere there's a video I want to share on his Twitter one day that I just can't bring myself to dig through all of it yet. Somewhere we've got a video of him taking a tire off a truck, and I mean, he was probably 3, And he's sitting here using an air ratchet. I had broke the lug nuts loose for him, but then he's like, me do it, and trying to take over. And, but he's backing the lug nuts out, and he pulls it out of the socket and gives it a fling. And it was really cute. That was why we were videoing it, is because he would pull it out and he took the lug nut and he just tossed. He
Well,
had
I
them
think
scattered everywhere.
he uh he wrote about this video in his book, I think, actually. Um,
Yeah, I think he's got it on his computer. I just
yeah, well,
can't go.
he said, I think he wrote about that video and said, I'm not sure when I realized that I don't like chasing down lug nuts, but at some point but I stack them neatly now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that in the
But
book too. I
everything was
thought that was
play.
really cute. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Cooper. Sorry.
He commented that he had a playful attitude towards it all. In the dance video, I think, him dancing on the. There's another video of him dancing on the tractor after doing a fence pull. When he was, I guess, probably about the same age, might have been a little younger. But that was everything to him. Well, when I posted one of those videos, I think I said that, to him, it was like a kid in a sandbox with Lincoln Logs and Tonka trucks, except he went full scale. He wasn't, his sandbox was this big 350-acre ranch that he bought himself, and his John Deere tractor, and
Mm-hmm.
he did everything. He did a lot of normal things, just on a drastically bigger adult scale. And
Maybe
it
I
was all play. He made it all play, and part of the drive came from knowing that, he basically certainly by the time he was 14. I mean, he got a lot of free reign.
Yeah.
He really, our whole lives really did revolve around him and his projects at that point.
It is amazing that like most 14-year-olds wouldn't have even had wouldn't have even gotten an opportunity or been allowed or even exposed to like a lot of the stuff he had basically mastered by that age. Um, which is, I mean, it like as I think we've all sort of talked about in various places, but like you're it's interesting to think. I really don't want. I think that the people. It's easy for people to look at someone like Kevin and be like, look what would look what kids could do if they were just unschooled or whatever. And I'm like, well, I definitely think that people are definitely capable of a lot more than they do day to day. But I do think that it's easy to see someone like that and just be like, oh, it's the method, it's the method, or it's like it's because of this educational philosophy. And I definitely think he was kind of a, a diamond in the rough. Um, but
He
yeah, I guess maybe we can talk because I do want to get into some of his plans. And while we have you here, I know that you have more information on this because you were alongside of him researching all of this stuff. So maybe like, do you want to give a brief overview of what got him interested in, his regenerative agriculture and water conservation plans? I think most people probably have a bit of a background on that, and then we can get into some of the meat of how he wanted to run things and set things up.
the regenerative agriculture really came from him trying to, he loved farming. And I mean, he's literally, he obviously started a farm business at 7. And so he loved learning about it. And so just as he was learning about it, and YouTube was a big part of his education, he started learning more about how you could build better and richer soil instead of spraying a lot of the chemicals and stuff he sees every year out here on all the hay farms. And yeah, he very much wanted to do whatever was going to be best long term for the environment. The water conservation thing, it was driven by dry water wells. The house he bought when he was 10, he knew there was a pretty good risk the well was dry. He knew that, or the well would go dry really fast when he got into that. And and so that was kind of the first exposure, to how bad the problem is with the aquifer depletion out here. But he went into that kind of knowing it, and and so that it was what it was. On his ranch, he had water, and he didn't have a lot, but he had enough for the little thing. He was going to be putting a really low powered pump because it was just going to be watering goats. And he knew he didn't have to pull very much. And by the time he got the fencing done, because he just started with raw land, he didn't actually buy a ranch. He saw this huge swath of brush, basically, unfenced, just wild land. It had a little bit of human damage from a drainage canal that had been dug through part of it, but he's the one who turned it into a ranch. And so by the time he finished his fencing and he put his pump in the well, and he did that himself. He didn't hire a pump contractor. By the time he got it in, he's like not getting any water. And so he pulls his pump back out, or he sets his pump all the way to the very, very bottom, where he can tell that it's, hitting bottom, and still nothing. And that was one of the few times that we ever saw him, actually look discouraged. And he was. That was a pretty big blow, and it was, so we pulled the pump back out. And, he realized the situation. He did some trading around and ended up getting a new well put in. Should be good at the current, depletion rate. That well should be good for at least 30 years, possibly 40. So he knew it would last him quite a while. And then, as soon as, not long after that got done, last year, our well at our house went dry. And we ended up living without running water for 9 months. That really, really affects you. There's just no avoiding it. When you're hauling water and you don't have just that ready supply of water that everybody in, modern culture is so used to, it really, really affects you. And that, he started learning a lot about it with the ranch, but when it hit the house, that was, our third dry well in a row, basically, with his projects. That, he had just found a new buyer for some of this stuff, because with COVID and all that went on with that, he had lost all his sales for a while. And so he had just found a new buyer, and then no water. We have 5 acres here at our house, and he used 4.5 of them, pretty much. But yeah, and that was a big impact. And he's like, there's got to be something. So the water conservation and trying to figure out what can be done different, really, that was the driving factor, because that's when, when you realized that just how the price difference had changed from doing the well on his ranch to the one here at the house. that he just realized he put it together. He's like, good Lord, what's it going to cost? When one day when I have kids, 30 years from now, when I have adult kids who need to drill a well, are they going to be able to afford access to the water at all?
Yeah.
Um, and it's very realistic that 30 years from now, a well is going to end up running $100,000 or more just to put the hole in the ground.
That's insane.
So I wonder.
Right now it's about, right now you can spend 30 grand just to put the hole in the ground.
Wow.
And I mean I know from last year's experience, it took us 9 months to be able to ultimately get a loan and try to come up with the money. It was a very painful year. We had a lot of things that seemed to go wrong last year, and
yeah,
I kind of miss it right now. But so that was the motivation, is that awakening to the big picture of it and what impact it's going to have on his future, on his eventual kids' futures here one day.
Mm-hmm. And
so that was the driving factor. But like part of it, Kevin had this way with pretty much everything. Like if you imagine a clock with 20 or 30 gears all turning in it, Kevin, and he actually has a wooden clock in his bedroom that he had built that does have like probably 20 something gears in it. He wanted to know how every single little gear affected every other gear separately. And like he would put together this kind of spider web mental image of how every little piece of everything affected every other little piece. And he looked at everything that way. He broke everything down to the tiniest little component, and how does that little component affect this one? How does it affect this one? And that was how he broke everything down in his mind. And so when he started looking at the aquifer problem, it was with that type of mindset that helped him break down the problem and look at it in a way that I doubt anybody else has. And that helped him. I did a lot of research for him, but like that helped him develop this plan and how to put something together that would be, most importantly to him, economically sustainable. Because he's like, if you do this, if you make big changes and they're not economically sustainable, they're not going to last. And so that's where I guess his kind of obsessive business education part really came into play. Is like, I have to make this economically sustainable, but he knew he wanted it to be environmentally sustainable too. Yeah. Because ultimately, if the two don't go hand in hand, it won't have staying power.
Mm-hmm. One way or the other.
Yeah, if it wasn't environmentally sustainable, eventually, you're not going to be able to farm out here anymore. But if it wasn't economically sustainable, the changes wouldn't hold. Mm-hmm. And be able to continue going. It does require human intervention. You cannot just leave the desert to nature. If once people have already torn it up, you have to have human intervention to restore it.
Well, especially if you
fields out here that sat for nearly 100 years that are barren because humans tore them up and nobody's done the work to restore them. Mm-hmm. And the desert doesn't really reclaim itself very well without that work.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to hear a little bit about like the details of what the plan was to to restore the aquifers, to do some regenerative agriculture. This is something we talk about quite a bit on this podcast, where There is a strain of environmentalism that says like humans need to be out of nature, and that's not what we think on this podcast at all. We think, it's very important for humans to be a positive force in nature. And there were actually, I don't know if you know about this, Mr. Cooper, or not, but there was a back and forth between Kevin and some quote unquote youth climate activists on Twitter that I waded into, because they were saying, this kid is a plant of Elon Musk or something like that. Just
Yeah, I
because he
remember
was,
that.
yeah, just because he was saying something along the lines of, he like being involved in agriculture is a pro-environmental stance, which is completely correct. But maybe Willow, you want to talk a little bit about what you know first, and then maybe Mr. Cooper can add on details.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I'm happy for him to kind of go through Kevin's plans because definitely has a better sense of that. I guess one thing that might just be useful background information for people who don't have a ton of the story is that so in the Great Basin Desert, there's a lot of hay farming, which is basically not, there's not enough rainfall and the soil's not good enough there to do hay farming without like pretty intensive irrigation. So right now, the hay farmers are allowed to pull water, and they're basically running irrigation systems that are pulling water out of the ground faster than it can replenish. And I think the water table is dropping there like 3 to 6 feet a year. And the
Right.
government, in response to this, had created a plan basically to fallow like 1/3 of the farms. Basically, which
Um,
is that correct? And I know it had
it's
changed. They had,
pretty close. Yeah, pretty close.
yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
so I'm the one who actually, he was out working on something, and he's like, find me everything you can find on everything about water here. Basically, he's like, I want to know every little detail of like how many acre feet of water every single farm out here owns. I want to know all the legal information. So he asked me to research that for him while he was out working on something. Um, then so I did, and I got all the information together, and yeah, the plan. Okay, so I guess first off, I'll explain kind of how water works here, because I know it's very different in a lot of places. Here we have, and this is common across the West, but we have what's called water rights. And basically, the water is property, or the right to pump that water is property, just like buying the land is. And they're separate property. So just because you buy land, you can't drill a well if you don't own a water right uh, um, to be able to get the water. If you pump water without owning it, there's some legal penalties. How that works is the way the state has allocated it is that you have to have 4 acre feet of water per 1 acre that you want to irrigate. And so that'll allow you to do up to 48 inches of total irrigation on that acre per year. Excuse me. And so how that gets measured, though, is just that. You own 4 acre feet per acre, and you can water that 1 acre with those 4 acre feet. Now, there is no adjustments or recognition or differences. If you're flood irrigating a rice field, they measure that as the same amount of water as if you're drip irrigating, some lavender plants or something that are anything really low water. So there's a drastic, obvious, difference in how much water you're using. But none of that gets measured. It's just 4 acre feet per acre. So if you own 4 acre feet, and a lot of what the state does is generally says aerial views. And if they see something suspect, like if you're trying to do 2 acres and you only have 4 acre feet, they'll send somebody out to check. Um, but yeah, there's no difference in that. It's just up to the farmer and whatever they're doing, whatever they're growing. As long as you have your 4 acre feet per acre, like I said, you can flood irrigate a rice field or something, and they don't measure the difference, even
Yeah.
though you're clearly using drastically more water.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was kind of the start of the plan, of Kevin's plan, is going, okay, well, this is how water gets measured. So I need to grow something that only uses, say, 24 inches or less of water a year. And as long as I have the acre feet per acre, it doesn't matter. The end result is that I'm using less water, and I don't have to deal with fighting the government to measure it different or anything like that. I can just do this as a private business and make it work. And the way to do that is some very good grazing and browse plants for animals. That most of what he found actually can do quite well on as little as 18 inches of water a year. But then beyond that, he's like, yeah, he's like, I see why the farmers aren't doing this. He said, because if you're just grazing it this way, it's not going to be economically sustainable. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the costs are still, you're not going to recoup your investment. And so from there, he's like, okay, so the only way to make this truly work is you've got to own your products. So instead of selling just hay as a commodity to somewhere else, he's like, you've got to own the end product that the customers are buying. And so he realized he's got to own processing, he's got to own the farm, he's got to own the whole thing, from beginning to end. And the other catch, and I think he had gotten into it with somebody on Twitter about this a little bit at some point, was he knew you had to do it at scale, because
Yeah.
you can't solve an aquifer problem that spans, the Great Basin Desert's kind of big. I don't even remember how many square miles, but
Yeah.
it takes up a chunk of almost all of Nevada and parts of every state surrounding it.
Yeah.
Now there's different aquifers in different parts, but even the one here is absolutely massive. Like, you can't do this and be a
I
small farmer.
I think I think that there's a people often use sort of like large scale agriculture and like industrial agriculture as sort of synonyms, and regenerative agriculture and like small scale farming as synonyms. And I think I remember, I think I had actually said like, oh, something about small scale farming or something. And he was like, no, like, no, we need to do like a good thing on a large scale, because otherwise, like, yeah, he was basically like, we don't have time to do it small.
No,
And he was also just
well, the
like,
problem,
yeah.
if like his farm mentor, a guy who was really helping him learn a lot. This guy's been farming hay out here for about 30 years, and he's third generation. Like, he's got 500 acres, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the smaller ones out here. Like, he can't even, him shutting down his whole farm, he could just shut down and stop, and it's not going to make much of a measurable difference. It's too small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, so, like, yeah, it has to be done at a massive scale. There's no other way. A 500 acre farm to a lot of people sounds really big, I know. And in the regenerative agriculture movement, I know that sounds huge. Most people, there's a lot of farmers out there that are at 20 acres, that I see that they're doing a regenerative homestead and things like that. But you can't begin to touch the aquifer depletion problem out here with less than about 2,000 irrigated acres.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, at 2,000 irrigated acres, then you can affect, actually, I don't think you can quite affect a full 10% of the problem.
Yeah.
So
So
it's gotta be huge. There's just no other way
yeah.
around it. When you can restore soil on a small scale, and you can do this for the purpose of the soil on a small scale, and that's great. It's a wonderful thing to do, and he was working on that.
Mhm.
But if you're trying to attack the aquifer problem, you've got to have a whole lot of land, irrigated land, that you got the control over to make the changes on. And if you don't, you can't do it big. You can't do enough
Yeah.
for it to matter. You're not going to get everybody on board. That's not going to happen unless he buys them out and takes control.
So his plan, and maybe I can sort of say what I understand his plan to be, and you can kind of fill in or correct me where I am wrong. But his plan was basically to start a like workers cooperative business where he was purchasing these, and he had like he knew which farms he wanted to purchase specifically based on like which ones he knew didn't have successors and who was like getting a bit older and might be willing to sell in the next, I think, like, you know, 5 years or so. And then his plan was to basically take over these farms, start doing regenerative, I think, like goat and turkey ranching on them. Maybe I'm sure other things. And he had a list of grasses that were like more drought resistant and needed less water that he was going to start sort of introducing into the area as they got fertilized and as there was more soil building up with the animal manure. And then his idea was to start, I think, like processing plants on all these farms that were owned by the people who are working in them. And the worker cooperative model, I believe, was to try and protect against like intergenerational sort of like die off or kids not wanting to take over their parents' farms.
Yeah. So this is it's you can't tackle a huge problem like this with simple solutions.
Yeah.
I guess is one way to put it. And so, yes, the intergenerational thing. He looked at, why aren't like his mentor is probably he's got to be the most environmentally conscious hay farmer out here. The man has given up a lot of profits to switch to lower profit hay that's not alfalfa. Put water sensors all over his fields so that when a field has adequate water, he'll turn it off.
Yeah.
He's doing the best he can.
Yeah.
But like for this guy to convert, to what Kevin would want to do with it, he'd be looking at a $2 or $3 million investment.
Yeah.
Get everything up and going, get all the protections from predators for the animals done, all the seeding done, the certified processing facilities, and trying to create a brand and then product to sell to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was easy because this guy actually would even open his books up, to Kevin. But he really wanted Kevin to take over his farm. His own kids aren't really interested in doing it. His kids kind of go back and forth. They do come out and work it with him every year, but they're not really interested. That's not what they want to spend their life doing. And so he was really looking to Kevin like, okay, I really want you to take over my farm one day.
Yeah.
And Kevin could quickly see, he's like, there's just no way. One, nobody out here really wants to put themselves out there to try and build a branded product at the end of it. Kevin didn't even really like doing it, which is part of why he used a pseudonym, and all he would ever refer to is that we're in the Great Basin Desert, and that was it.
Yeah.
But to him, like getting on Twitter and all that was really, and trying to become kind of famous, was a sacrifice he was willing to make. He did not enjoy it. But he knew that would have to happen. And so, like his mentor, just like with almost all the farms out here, like they don't just inherit the farm. I think this is a common misperception about these big farms. It's actually quite common on big farms everywhere. The next generation buys their inheritance. and they might buy it at a slight discount, but they have to buy their inheritance. And so they've either got loans or they don't have full control from, their fathers or mothers, or, so they've got a lot of debt. They've got all this investment and all this specialty equipment, and they are land and water rich, but they're not cash flow rich to the point they could do something like this.
Yeah.
Not even close. There's one farm out here who might be in the ballpark. Land and water wise, he certainly has adequate control. Cash wise, to make this kind of change, and then the ability to try and build a brand of products to go with it. No, I don't think he would.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kevin recognized his youth as a tool, and the knowledge he gained and all that was a real tool to him. And clearly, I mean, he was building himself as a brand with some degree of success. And that really started giving him more confidence he would be able to pull this off. And so, like, for example, the most important farm that he had targeted out of the first three is split up between three different properties. And so the first set of the properties from that, he looked at it, and there's 4 pivots, which for people who don't know, it's the big circular irrigation. So if you look at a farm area and you see all these green circles with blank ends on the corners, that's what it is. And so this one's got 5, actually they recently added a 6th pivot there. And so there's these main 4 in a perfect square. And in the middle of it, there's already some livestock facilities where the guy brings in sheep occasionally throughout the year or through the winter and stuff. And even cattle from time to time. And then there's also a really big hay barn right in the middle. And so Kevin looked at this and he's like, so what I can do here is fix up I'd have to fix up the fencing, replant the fields with Siberian wheatgrass and forage kochia were probably the 2 main plants because they're easy to grow and out here, and they provide a lot of nutrition for very little water input. Mm-hmm. He had a list of total of, I think it was 13 plants. I tried to go through the plan before the interview and take notes, and emotionally I couldn't do that. So, but I know that kochia, Siberian wheatgrass, crested wheatgrass, and Paiute orchard grass, those are big ones for him that could all do it on 18 inches of water a year or less. And he's like, okay, so what I can do is create a rotational, grazing here and turn it into a goat dairy. That was his goal with this.
For dairy that he wanted to do with that one?
And yeah, he wanted to turn it into a goat dairy.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay. And okay, Kevin loved when people would nitpick and find problems with his ideas and plans. He would ask for it. Anytime he came up with an idea, he would he'd come to us and tear this to shreds, please. Find every possible flaw you can. He loved learning where he was wrong about anything. Because that would let him refine and improve. And yeah, so that was a big part of it. And, he brought that to me, and I'm going, son, dairy, do you realize what regulations are about milk and all that? This is a big deal. You're going to spend probably more on meeting regulations than anything else. And he grinned, and he's like, nope, and shook his head. And I'm like, okay. He's like, I have to brand my products, remember? I'm like, okay. And he's like, so I'm not going to make any human consumable milk products at all. He's like, one, it gives me more flexibility with my plants. I can put a salt brush out, and the negative impact to the flavor will never matter. So his goal with that was to take the second hay barn that's off to the side of this property, and build basically a little soap factory out of it. He wanted to make a brand of soap, body wash, and shampoo out of goat's milk mixed with sage, lavender, and stuff like that,
Huh.
and market it as kind of a high-end bath products brand for women.
Cool. That's
and
fantastic.
and I'm like, okay. And so he pulled out his numbers, and the milk was wholesale worth, I don't know, $5 or $7 a pound or something like that. It wasn't very much.
Mm-hmm.
And the money, the gross, he would have other costs, of course, but the gross revenue, it was like 200 times, increase in the revenue
For the
off of
shampoos
what,
and soaps.
right.
Yeah.
And he's like, there's enough really pretty women out there who are influencers. He's like, I can get some of them on board because a lot of them are passionate about the environment.
Yeah.
And he's like, if I can get some of them on board for, a cut or paying them a little bit, he's like, I can advertise the heck out of this. Then we have the end product. He said, I create more employment here for the farm. Diesel fuel gets all but eliminated. Fertilizer would be totally eliminated. But he knew he had to own the entire thing, because if he was just going to sell goat's milk, he wouldn't make enough money to keep the farm going.
Yeah.
And so that was just that one. And like every time he came up with a product idea, he would come up. So he's got domain names. We were going through his list of domain names a few days ago. I mean, there's like 30 or 40 domain names that he's acquired, that as soon as he came up with a product idea, he's like, I got to put a name to it. It's got to be something good that fits. And then immediately buy the domain name.
Wow.
I love that.
And so for like the women's, soap and body wash and shampoo idea, he came up with the idea for the name Basin Naturals. And,
Right.
Bought the domain. He had already been working on a logo for it and everything. And he knew that right there would really help fund a whole lot of the rest of it. That if he could get to that point, the revenue he would have the income to start really funding a lot of the expansion of this into a lot of the other farms out here. That one was the one he saw as kind of the major source of income.
Uh-huh.
But and in looking at why other farmers aren't doing this, he's like, this is going to cost so much money. The farmer who owns that particular one doesn't have an heir to pass it on to. I mean, he does have heirs, but they're not here. They don't work the farm. They don't want to work the farm. They're gone. And
Does this guy
so,
know what his plan was for his farm?
no, probably not.
I I'd love I'd love I mean, part of me sometimes I wonder if uh I mean, yeah, I'd love to have some kind of documentary about Kevin produced at some point, and it would just be amazing to just like I'd love to talk to these people who he had like had like detailed plans for what he was going to do with their property, which I know would probably be unwelcome for most people, but it's just yeah, it's just remarkable.
um, so that to him was part of his phase one. He called it,
Yeah.
how he had the plan broke down. He even bought greeningthegreatbasin.com because he wanted to make a documentary of it as he was doing it. And so he had bought that for a domain name for a documentary about changing how it's farmed. And so he had similar ideas that they weren't as big and profitable as what the goat dairy part probably would be. but he had raw pet food brand lined up that he wanted to have going. He had shoot, I'm trying to remember some. He had a leather products idea. Oh, wool. That was a big one he thought would do really well.
Oh, he was
Because
going
he
to
looked
do.
at how, yeah, sheep are kind of big out here anyways, and so there's a lot of sheep farmers, and but a common thing done with a lot of them is that they pay or allow shearers to come in, shear the wool, and take it as payment for doing the shearing. And so the sheep, the farmers, a lot of them don't even actually sell their wool. They only raise them for lambs, and they sell lambs. They don't sell lamb meat. So they're not selling the end product. They're way down the value chain.
Yeah.
As Kevin loved to point out. And so he's like, nope, we got to climb the value chain. And so he looked into what it would take to keep the wool here. He's like, if all these other farmers are willing to give away wool in exchange for shearing, then I just need to hire a shearing crew and I'll have all of this wool. And they can give it to me. I'll keep it here. And so he looked at what it would take to convert another hay barn into being a wool processing facility.
So he was going to he was not even going to start by having his own sheep, but just going and taking the wool.
Well, the
or shearing.
one of the first three target farms already has a herd of probably 500 or 600 sheep. And so he would have had that. And to even acquire the hay barn, he'd have to buy that farm out. And so he would have his own sheep to help get it started. But he's like, if I make wool beanies and maybe go advertise them at the ski resorts, and he's got an in to one ski resort now already, that he's friends with the family that owns the ski shop there. So he already had him in. He's like, if I start making like wool beanies and scarves and sell them as locally produced, locally raised wool and the environmental benefits, he's like, I want to target the ski shops and the universities. Because the entire Great Basin Desert has some pretty brutal winters and you need them.
Yeah.
And so that was his goal, was to try and keep the wool processing here and keep sales within this region of, wool beanies, wool. He thought about possibly mittens, scarves, and beanies were the thing too. Some percentage of wool is like a natural, I guess, just isn't usable. I forget what he knew all this stuff a lot better than I did. And so he's like, well, the wool that can't be processed in the final product is just not good enough quality. And he said, we compost it. We're going to have animal poop galore anyways. He said, that'll actually help keep the soil softer. Wool compost great. And so he's like, we'll have a composting business on the side, although I'll probably keep all my compost. And so in each of these properties, he had been able to break down, how he could use it with low water plants to livestock to an end product he could sell. His goal was to keep all his sales within 300 miles, which we have Vegas and Salt Lake City both within 300 miles. So that probably wouldn't be too terribly hard to do.
Yeah.
I think Reno's within 300 miles too. It might be a little longer because of funky paths for the road, but that was his goals. He really wanted all sales within 300 miles. He does not like these mega long supply chains that have been built up where you're dependent on stuff that's so far away. And so he had the wool, the one with the wool. He wanted to do one with turkeys and chickens, and then keep just enough fields and hay to supplement winter feed. But he's like, never an acre more. I want to grow just enough hay for what I need to help our animals through the winter. Not a single acre more. No hay sales.
Because
he had no interest in that at all.
as far as I understand from what Kevin told me, like right now, the way most of the hay businesses are operating in the area is that they produce the hay, sell it to, I think, farms in like cattle, like farms in China, and then we buy the meat back. Like, is
Um,
that,
I don't think that any of the meat comes back, but I don't know. I don't know that any of the hay from here goes to China, but I do know that there are farms in other smaller geographic areas around here that actually China has bought the hay farms, or
right?
Chinese businesses has bought the hay farms, and yes, they are shipping it back. Um,
Oh,
and so, and some of it I know goes like to Chinese-owned pork farms here too.
yeah.
So that's part of it. But like we know, a couple of years ago, one of the farms he wanted to buy out. We were talking with the owner, just chit chat, you know. Um, and he had just picked up, I guess, it was a big contract for Dubai, of shipping a lot of hay to Dubai. And it's like, man, that's what, 8,000 to 9,000 miles away. I don't know that's clear across the globe. Um, and so we did learn a lot more. Part of his farm mentor making changes was he realized that the pellet factory he was selling a lot of his alfalfa to was actually shipping them to Japan. And he's like, I don't like my products being shipped that far. And so he's been getting more into baled grass hays for more regional animals and livestock. Um, I know that during COVID he gave a ton of hay to the Navajo Nation to try and help them out, stuff like that. But he's been switching. That was part of his idea in switching to lower water grass hays. Is he doesn't like that some of his products are getting shipped that far. And like I said, he does try to be very environmentally conscious with what he has to work with.
Yeah.
All I have to add here is that, like, I'm thinking of Kevin's book, An Ambitious Homeschooler's Journey, and my God, the ambition here is just unbelievable. And it's just so inspiring because quite a bit on Twitter, I interact with young people older than Kevin, who are feeling like they want to get onto some land, they want to do something good for the environment, they want to have a vocation. And it seems to me, and I wonder if Mr. Cooper, you'd like to give your own advice, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how Kevin's vision will continue on, or we're hoping that it does. But my advice to a lot of those people is, like, these opportunities are out there. I mean, I'm thinking about this farmer that Kevin was working with, whose own children weren't interested in taking over the farm operation. There are so many opportunities like that, and you can be so intelligent about value added products and learning about the global economy and where does all of this stuff go, and does that ethically align with my value system, owning all the sort of vertical integration, owning the manufacturing and processing and distribution, incredibly ambitious and incredibly inspirational. And so, I think part of it is that a lot of young people in general, they kind of think that their life should be built around a job in which they are hired by someone else. And I think part of it is just flipping the perspective that kind of gets flipped with homeschooling in general, is that it has to come from within you. Sometimes the thing in the world doesn't exist and you have to make it, and you have to try and you have to figure things out, and it's very like entrepreneurial mindset. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And Kevin was very driven to foster that. Clearly, obviously, in the book. And part of how he wanted to help foster that was, so the corporate structure he had in mind. It wasn't a lot of people do things just as a sole proprietor, or they make an LLC, and they might not even do a great job of keeping up with their LLC paperwork just right. A lot of people don't dive into the business technicalities a lot. That was Kevin's starting point, was all that stuff. And so him figuring out a corporate structure that would make this something that would last was an early part of it. So like all the land he was going to put into one business and basically just charge the operating farms rent equal to property taxes. And this other business would not be owned by anybody but him, and nobody could change the land that way. So he's like, and part of the lease will be that, you know, if we're going to shut down a field for some reason, it has to be replanted with sagebrush and saltbrush and all the different native vegetation has to be restored. And that was going to be a requirement of the way he set up the leases. The operating company, the one that actually makes the products and you know, raises the animals and all that, he was very determined minimum had to be a third employee owned. And like Kevin wasn't driven by wealth. He had acquired an abnormal amount of wealth for a 14-year-old, but that didn't drive him like even a little bit. It was just, to him, it's just a tool towards an end goal. And so he's like, he loved when he learned about Publix grocery stores and how it's an ESOP, employee stock option owned. And he's like, okay, that model, he said, because then you're not bound by this generational thing. If the next generation doesn't want to farm, they don't have to. You can hire from anywhere, and they can come in and start taking ownership of this big, massive, you know, farm company he was trying to build. They wouldn't get to come in and destroy the land because the company that owns the land would be able to put in limitations on what could be done. But the employees could come in and they could bring a lot of creative solutions, but they could have ownership instead of just, you know, farmhands aren't famous for having, you know, being high paying work.
Yeah.
And another reason that he liked that idea is that, like, Kevin's farm mentors wanted to hire him for a few years, but he can't. Kevin could run heavy equipment if he owned it or we owned it. He can work any kind of dangerous job on a farm as long as we own it or he owns it, but he can't get hired to like run heavy equipment by another operation until he's 16.
Right.
And by trying to make it employee owned, farmhand kids could get an earlier start like the farm kids gets to.
Oh, okay.
The farm kids get to step in and start earning good money at, you know, whatever age their parents let them start. And all the farmhand kids can't do anything till they're 16. Any other kid out here who's not already part of the wealthier families that own these big farms, they can't get that head start. And so that irked him a lot. He knew he already kind of had a head start because of what he built. And for anybody who thinks it came from us, trust me, it didn't. He was far wealthier than his parents. But that irritated him a lot, that he couldn't hire a friend of his to come help him and use his tractor.
Right.
You know, and teach them how to start using the tractor. He couldn't do that. And he thought that was a really ridiculous, lopsided law. And so he's like, the employee ownership option thing, he said, even if it's only a third of the farm, he was pretty open to having like a third investor owned, him keep a third as just what he deserves for his efforts,
Yeah.
and then have a third set aside that employees can earn their ownership percentage. And that was likely how he would end up, with the thing set up. And but he's like, if employees have ownership, then their kids can get that head start that
Yeah.
he couldn't get, that none of his friends out here can get.
Yeah.
So that was a really big motivator in that, is that he saw, some of his friends who came from the right family got to start earning, $10, $15 an hour at 10 years old, while other friends who came from a much poorer family, well, what can they do but play video games and ride bikes and,
Yeah.
so that was a big motivator of the ownership structure idea, but getting rid of the generational debt. I mean, if each generation has to buy the farm, buy their
Why is
inheritance,
it like that?
because farms really aren't very cash rich, I guess.
Or is it just because the farms
They
are in debt already, or?
well, yeah, they generally stay in debt, and part of the reason they stay in debt is, yeah, they have to buy their inheritance. Part of it is, I mean, the equipment is if you look, I mean, at what farm equipment runs, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, Kevin spent, what was it, 50 grand or so on his tractor,
Yeah.
and it wasn't near as big as the ones they use on the hayfields out here. And then there's all the specialty tools for, the swathers for cutting the hay, the balers, and
Yeah.
they got these. Oh, I can't believe I'm totally brain farting what they're called now, but for where they pick up entire stacks of bales,
Hmm.
a squeeze. So they have got squeezes, and even used, these things are tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Most of them need to keep, at least one or two semis and flatbed trailers going for moving their product around. Um, the power bills for running a pivot are huge. So all this stuff really adds up. And so for farmers to be able to retire, they've got to sell. So they sell to their kids who want to take over.
Yeah. So, Mr. Cooper, I wanted to ask you, just like, I mean, Kevin's plans for uh, this area were just so extensive. Do you see, like, have you
Extensive
thought of
or expensive?
extensive? Sorry, not
Both.
yet.
But yeah.
Both, for sure. But do you see any way, do you see any way that things, I don't know, other ways of remediating some of the problems he was looking at, or other, I don't know. I mean, I just, I know that you have, that, we've been in talks about kind of working on continuing his work in some avenues, but I just wonder, I guess, I don't know. And I know it's like, I know these really relied on Kevin to make them happen. I listen to you talk about them, and I'm like, oh, I want to be involved in that. Like I want to, I want to see those things happen, and I want to, yeah, it's very sort of inspiring and infectious to hear about the things he wanted to do, because you really can like feel the possibility behind them. But yeah, I wanted to ask, like, I guess, are there any leads, or do you see how things might be continued at all?
Um, as far as the Aqua plan, I have no clue. Somebody with a whole lot of tens of millions would have to show up and want to carry it on.
Yeah.
Uh, we can't. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just no way our family could. So, yeah, I don't know. I There is a family who is trying to carry on, who wants to buy his ranch and try to keep that going. They got a big down payment for what they're trying to do here, but it sounds like financing the rest is going to be a struggle. So we've been taking money from the GoFundMe and reducing the price of the ranch for them dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
Um, and we are doing that. I know I talked with you a little bit on the phone about that possibility a week or so ago, and we are doing that. So that way, we're not trying to be greedy here. We're just trying to get ourselves moved to a farm where we can continue.
Yeah.
Because continuing here is hard, anyways, but emotionally, it's just paralyzing to be outside and try and do anything.
Yeah.
The gap in the mountain where the reservoir is where he died. I mean, we can see that from every spot on our property, and we used to think it was his most beautiful view ever, and now we freeze it up and paralyzed. We're paralyzed. We can't keep going here. But this other family wants to take over the ranch and try to continue a lot of what Kevin had in mind for it. They actually live closer to it than we do.
Yeah.
And they have a better view, so they can actually monitor the ranch even closer than Kevin was able to. And so we're really trying hard to work with them and help them take it over while also getting the funds we need for the other farm we found that meets our needs amazingly perfect. We have a lot of medical concerns, but want to try and keep up going in the best way we can. And so, we did find a place that has the mental health care that our other son needs, like in walking distance for most of what he needs. It's really close to a little town, and the house would be very easy to make wheelchair accessible for me, and that was a big plus. Yet it has enough land to actually farm.
And
like
water.
Hard to find. Yes, and it has no shortage of water. That won't be a concern there.
I'm wondering if there's anything you can think of at the moment, besides the GoFundMe, that we can add along with this episode, for people to get involved, or to keep track of what might come of Kevin's various plans.
Right now, following his Twitter account at the Cole Summers is where I'm trying to keep everybody up to date on what's going to happen with his ranch. I know Willow and I and another lady are hoping we can get a really good website put together with his farm plans. But emotionally, for me this is really hard. It hadn't even been 2 months yet, and so we're trying. Anybody who's read the second to last chapter of his book would know why we're trying so hard to do what we can to keep things going.
I think that the best thing right now, and I could say the most sort of the most time pressing thing is, if we can attach the GoFundMe, and that is sort of like just making it work financially for this family to buy the farm that's looking at it is a pretty big deal, because it means that it's not going to go to somebody looking to put up huge apartment buildings or just do water intensive hay farming. It's
or worse. We've had 2 different people throw out the suggestion of making an off-road racing track, because Kevin kept all the sand dunes natural and intact and all this stuff.
Oh my goodness.
We're pretty much ignoring them. I don't think they're going to try and make an offer, but God, I hope they don't. As bad as I want to sell that place and get over and that fund us getting to the new farm. I don't think emotionally I could handle knowing that was happening.
No, seriously.
I think I would decline the offers regardless on that one, but that suggestion got thrown out, and we were just like, no, we're not going to show you the property. We're not really going to entertain anything you talk to us about right now. We're pretty well ignoring that one.
But
we need to get moved on, and we need to try and get to a farm that is more suitable for us to do within our abilities, but not at that price.
yeah.
So we're like I said, we're basically all the GoFundMe money now is trying to work out the balance of helping this other family keep his ranch going, which also lets us start another regenerative farm that is at a way that meets our medical limitations and needs. So,
Yeah.
And of course, the way Kevin structured his companies, his publishing company with his book, he set it up so that automatically, as soon as the balance in the publishing company's account reaches where there's no fees for having the account, it does an automatic transfer to fund his farm company. And that was why he got into the books. And so, yeah, he's got one more book he finished writing, but it needs illustrated. We're working on that. Well, no, we're not. We're wanting to get working on that. Yeah, some things are really hard to try and move forward on right now. But we're trying. And then he's got a third book that he had started on. We don't know how far he got. I've got a lot of his notes. I don't have his mind maps because those would be on his computer, and that's kind of like the bedroom. It's still something we're not ready for yet. But he's starting a book he wanted to title Entrepreneurial Unschooling, where he could teach all the principles of that it would take for someone else to do similar, but what works in their area and for their lives and their strengths versus their weaknesses and stuff like that. And we're going to try to get that book finished for him. We don't know how far he got. He made a lot of notes.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say backup copies of our text history, because he would text me a lot of his ideas and his little save it for self notes he would put in our text history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but, I think there's going to be a lot more stuff coming up, hopefully in the next, in the next year, Ashley, to kind of continue some of his more concrete plans. But yeah, I guess the really sort of the thing that's being focused on right now is trying to get Kevin's family moved to a property that they can manage better and get his ranch sold. So.
Well, we really do. If somebody can come up with the money and wants to carry on the massive scale project to try to salvage aquifer here and show that this can work, and Kevin recognized that just phase one was probably going to cost him between $40 and $50 million. And here, we're a family living and we've got nothing but fixed disability income.
Yeah.
He had income, but we never touched it. Everything he ever earned is still sitting in his company. And it was beyond ambitious to come up, to do that. But that's why he got into the books. It's why he wrote that movie. Anybody who follows him on Twitter, I guess, would know that he tried writing a movie that he could film really cheaply and try to get it on Amazon Prime so that it would help fundraise to make the farm. He knew he had to have an outside source of revenue. Mm-hmm. And he knew it had to be something, it couldn't be a second job. It had to be something that could produce very large amounts of revenue, and something like a book and movies really fit that bill, which is where all that really started coming about. Was those projects were just meant to fund the farm ideas. So that was the whole purpose of those.
Mm-hmm. So I guess for me to wrap up the main, what is there anything we haven't covered, or is there a main takeaway for people who are inspired by Kevin's journey, and I don't know, maybe just some thoughts about this brilliant star that shone so bright, and was a sort of a beacon for a lot of us interested in trying to be as ambitious as possible, to realize our own visions and values. Any sort of takeaway thoughts or anything that we haven't yet covered that you wanted to say, either Willow or Mr. Cooper?
Um, Kevin, if anybody who's read that book knows that he was a very firm believer that most people are a lot more capable than they realize, than what they've been taught to believe they're capable of. And that I know would be a key message Kevin would want people to take away, is that, people have been taught that there's limits, too many limits to what they can do, and a lot of these limits are wrong, or false information. That most people are far more capable than they realize, and that a lot of the environmental problems are things that you don't have to wait on politicians to try to solve. And in fact, politicians sometimes come up with the wrong answers. There's a lot of action you can take on your own, and he was a living example of that.
I love that. That's so inspirational. Yeah. Willow, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that really just I kind of keep cycling back to is that, like, yeah, look at, I think a lot of our limitations are imposed by almost a kind of like selfish attachment to like how we think things are supposed to be, or how we like want to be seen. And if you just start doing stuff and don't definitely think about it, but don't get caught in this sort of like cyclical self sabotage that I think most people do almost unconsciously. But there's just like, I don't know, every time I sort of really dive deep into thinking about Kevin's life, I'm just struck by like how much, like just how freely his energy flowed, and how much he was just like, it just felt like he looked at the world through these like really clear eyes. That was like, he was just focused on like, okay, what needs to be done and how am I going to do it? And if you really strip it down to that, like, and really asking yourself the question of like, what needs to be done? I think that so much opens up, and not going about like, oh, well, I could never do this, or there's so much that comes into it that I think is motivated by fear when we think about these things. But yeah, I guess just be humble and know that what you think is possible is probably wrong, and there's probably a lot more possible in the world. But yeah, I hope as updates come up with the projects that Kevin's dad and many of us are trying to help continue. Maybe we can reconvene and talk about them also.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Okay, well, Thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Cooper. I know it's not easy to talk about these topics, but I think it's really inspirational for a lot of people, so I really appreciate it. And of course, both of you for helping Kevin on his way. I know that you're both in the dedication for his book, and that's really cool because, he was extremely ambitious and seemed like a unique person in the world, but he also had a lot of supporters and who saw that in him and helped him a lot. So that's important too, that we are supportive of one another's dreams in that way. Okay, I'll wrap it up there. Thanks again, Mr. Cooper, for coming on. Thanks, Willow, for organizing. This was lovely.
Thank you, Ashley, and yeah, thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you both.